the conference, and anyone else that wishes to join will be joining us shortly. I would like to acknowledge the officers that have joined our meeting, including Executive Officer Christine Suarez. Sorry about that. Community Affairs Department Scott Nuzzi, and Officer Michael Joseph and Joe Nataro. I believe that at this time, Deputy Inspector Joseph Nataro is going to be our first presenter regarding the 70th precinct and the status and history of the station house.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so yeah, the last time, it's been a while since we've all been together face to face, and I know that the 7-0 was a topic of discussion. Obviously, to remove, to actually find a new location for the command because of the challenges of where it's at now. Back in January of 2019, we actually put a request into OMB to conduct a site search for that relocation. That request is still sitting with OMB. They haven't rejected the request, but they haven't approved it either. Obviously, internally, we don't have, city-owned space anywhere in the 7-0 that could accommodate the 7-0. But again, we need OMB to make that approval so that the next step would be obviously DCAS would then instruct CBRE to go out and start to do a site search and, kind of program, put a program together for what we would need for a 7-0 precinct, and then conduct a site search for, private space, so to speak. So, and that's where we're at. I mean, it's just slow going and we need that approval.
That approval is subject to their looking or approving that what?
So again, it's a space request that we submit to OMB, and they just approve. Basically, they just need to say, yeah, you know what, we agree. Let's conceptually, for now, agree and approve to conduct site search, and then that's when DCAS would have CBRE start the search, for a possible relocation. They'll put a program together, understand the needs for the command, and start to look, out there just to see where we could possibly go. But OMB has not given them that approval yet. So they're not technically funding it. They're not saying that they're definitely going to fund it. They just have to tell us conceptually, yeah, go out and start looking.
And what lights the fire under them to do that?
That's great. I have no idea. We're constantly talking, speaking with them. This is the OMB task force. We bring up all these. It's not the only request we have in, obviously. Mm-hmm. We're constantly asking, hey, what's the status? And the answer is the decision hasn't been made yet.
Svi, may I ask a question?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
So Inspector Nataro, I think one thing we can certainly do is ask our city council members to put pressure on this. That's something that did work in the past in terms of moving it along, and yes, it fell back again. But my question is any of the work that was done on the scoping study at the current location applicable to a site search? I mean, can you use the sort of plans and the specs from that to inform what kind of lot you would need, for instance?
Yes, I mean, we could definitely present that to CBRE if they were given the go-ahead to do that. CBRE is going to, that's the first thing we're going to do. They're going to sit down and try to understand the program. So any work that was done in the past, we could definitely provide that to them, yes.
And then my follow-up to that is, was the scoping study, did it determine that there's no way it can go in the current location? I mean, to my eyes, it certainly doesn't seem like it can, but is there something determinant in the scoping study that said no way, no how can it be here, a new site? I mean,
No, I don't know. That wasn't the purpose of the scope. I think, listen, I actually worked in the 7-0 back in 1999 and 2000. Nothing has changed. It's the same problem back then as it is now. And it's not really the only command that doesn't belong in a particular location. We outgrow a lot of our space, communities grow, obviously what's going on that block, it's congested. So no, that wouldn't be the purpose of the scoping. It's really to say, we've outgrown the location, we need a new spot, and this is what we need. And it kind of puts those parameters together.
Thanks.
Okay, is
Can
there
I
any
say
other
something? It's
questions?
Joe Dweck.
Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. We have a location that it just came up, it seems. It says it's available. It's on Nostrand Avenue and Avenue I. It's the northeast portion of that. It's a very, very large lot, and it seems to be completely available. And if we think out of the box a little bit, in fact, I think it could be a split precinct between us and the 6-3. That's one part of this, is that location that seems to be available, and it's a very, very, very large lot. B, I'd like to get together, as Sean just alluded to, bring all the electeds in a room and get advocates in order to move the ball forward. At this point in time, with the $1.9 trillion stimulus, and some of it coming here to New York, hundreds of billions coming to New York, they're going to want to fund projects. This is a project that can get funded. It's not as if it's an impossibility. Now there's going to be money available, and the fact that we're going to have something ready for them to do, I think, is possible. I think that the stars might be aligned to try to get this done, but we have to get advocates in our as our representatives in order to move this along. And I want to make sure that we try to get that done as soon as possible. Get everybody in a room and move it along.
Yeah, political help is definitely welcome and probably necessary if you want to move it along. So I would definitely agree with that approach.
Thank you. Joe, are you sure that property is up for sale?
No, yes, there's a large sign that says available. I just saw the sign recently. It's an enormous lot. It's got to
Yes,
be
it is.
20,000 square feet.
It's definitely a very nice lot over there, but I thought that they were going to be starting some work, and that was not, unless that sign just went up somehow, I didn't see. I will check it out.
Recent sign fee. It's a recent signs fee. I think it only went up a week or two ago. So whatever deal they might have had evidently fell through.
I'll definitely look into that. For that. Are there any other questions?
I think the real thing is to get the representatives, the electeds, in one room and move the ball forward, as we're saying.
That's a given. That's for sure. The only question is to present them a property that's not available is not a good thing to do. But it's definitely something to say. Why don't we look into it?
Hey, if you guys could email me that address, it's something that we could look at. I don't know how many square. I thought you said 20,000 square feet. I might have heard you wrong.
No, it's about 20,000. It's big.
I don't want to. So I don't want to pop the balloon. That might not be enough, but I'll definitely take a look at it.
Look, 20,000 square foot in one footprint is a large spot.
He's talking about that it's what do you call it? That it's a northeast corner, and you'll see it's a lot that's surrounded by boards. It's right next to the FedEx building, I believe.
Okay, gotcha.
But we will certainly get you that location, and I have a couple of relocate the precinct house enthusiasts in the community who from time to time send us ideas for locations. So we will continue to forward those ideas to you, and you can just keep them in your pocket for when OMB says green lights the search.
It looks like we have a question from Mr. Wallen. Glenn?
Yes. Do we have any idea how big the current 7-0 plot is?
That's a great question. I do not know the square footage of the 7-0, but I could get back to you on that.
Well, just because 20,000 doesn't sound that large to me.
No, it's not. Typically, no, but I just don't know the current square footage of the 7-0.
I mean, it would be nice to have my house on 20,000 square feet, but for a police precinct, it seems pretty small.
Yeah.
It's at least 20,000 square feet, and the current precinct was made for 25 cops. We have 400, so it's absolutely impossible. It's 20,000 square feet without a second floor. That's just one floor, so I think it's a very substantial.
Okay, we'll definitely look into that. Is there any other questions? Glenn, your hand is still up?
Svi, I just want to remind the board that we will be sending a response to the citywide statement of needs and it will express the board's disappointment that the citywide statements of needs did not recognize the 70th Police Precinct House as a need. So we'll get that off. I was waiting for this meeting in case anything new and exciting happened, but we'll just get our regular mantra of we're disappointed off to Marissa Lago tomorrow.
That'll be a great idea. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, since you were here, Inspector Natara, it's gotten actually worse on Lawrence Avenue. There's yeshivas there. They expanded UCP, and it's absolutely impossible for a cop to get down that street, or in case of emergency, God forbid. It's actually worse. And as I said, this location at Avenue I and Nostrand can be a combined 6-3 and 7-0. I think it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The 6-3 needs to move too. And like I said, you know, we don't just simply put the request in when we have our discussions. We do tell them that it's a priority, that it is a need. But again, you know, OMB sets the priorities. And like I said, they have to give us that approval.
All right, we'll shake them up and really appreciate you coming back to our board with the update. And let's just, you know, we always have to keep trying. So full court press, everyone.
Okay. I didn't hear the last thing that Joe was saying because my computer went dark and now it's lit back up. But okay, I'm sure that we got what he said.
No other hands at this point.
Either there seem to be no additional questions. And so we can thank NYPD Capital for joining us, and you're certainly welcome to stay. But Svi, I'm hoping you can hear me, and would you like to move on to the next agenda item, because we do have Darren Johnston with us on the call.
And Sean, it looks like Svi is having something else. So I think that we should just move on. I don't think he can hear you at this point, but while he's resolving that, perhaps we could move on to our next speaker.
Is that all right with you, Mr. Johnston?
Good to go.
All right, then I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Just to introduce myself to everyone on the call, my name is Darren Johnston. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Development and Crime Prevention at the Center for Court Innovation. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of some of the programs that we implement and touch on some of the challenges in community that we attempt to address through these programs. If there are questions or places that you want me to stop and pause on, please feel free to do so. And I do just want to ask, is it possible for me to share my screen? I see the share button here has lit up. Is that okay? Can I do that?
Yep. Go ahead. I just made you the presenter.
Perfect, 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 perfect. So I'm going to be presenting at the same time as I'm sharing some of these ideas. Give me 1 second just to set this up here. Okay, can everybody see the screen?
Yes, great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so a quick note about the Center for Court Innovation. For those who are unfamiliar, CCI for short creates operating programs essentially to test new ideas and solve problems across New York City. We do have a location in Newark, New Jersey. We do have a site actually in the UK as well, doing some international work, technical assistance to communities that have similar challenges. But essentially, our operating programs and demonstration projects test new ideas to address thorny challenges in community, particularly those that are pertaining to the justice system, and how we can reform, how can we reform the justice system, working from the inside and working with community. Now, the department that I work with specifically, Community Development and Crime Prevention, has a few goals, and I'm going to go over about, there are really 6 ideas that we push forward, and I think some of these might be relevant for some of the conversations all of you have had in past meetings. But just to set the foundation and so everyone's clear, our department really is dedicated to fostering safe and healthy neighborhoods, and the focus is for crime to be rare. We do think social cohesion is a critical component in that, a cross section of interdisciplinary stakeholders need to be at the table to make sure that that happens, and that young people are also seen as an asset, as they are often identified, particularly 16 to 24 years old, as those who are most at risk and most connected to the justice system, particularly in our communities where there are pockets of poverty. And so the tools that we use in order to address those priority areas are many. Some of them range from tools like placemaking, which is essentially a strategy to activate neglected public spaces. Other tools that we use are credible messengers to change norms around violence. These are folks that are from the community, that have inroads and ties and connected with folks who are at risk, who may have had contact with the justice systems themselves and have found ways to navigate those challenges. We also believe in healing spaces to help residents recover from trauma, particularly in our micro neighborhoods or pockets in our neighborhoods where poverty is prevalent and trauma is pervasive. There's healing that needs to happen in order for folks to recover from that and move forward and do the reform work. We also believe in youth entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurial programs, and generating capital for underserved neighborhoods. We have a lot of young people who need entrepreneurial skills legitimized. They may have figured out how to survive in other ways that are not so legitimate. And so developing programs that help them transition those skills and assets in a legitimate way. And many other community-centered programs and ideas. Just to briefly give some ideas and examples of some of how these projects have looked and the ideas behind them. And so the first idea that I want to talk about is just re-envisioning safety in general. And so we believe that, it's more effective and more humane to create communities that respond to crime in alternative ways that do not solely rely on law enforcement and incarceration. And our projects use long-lasting, community resilient or resident networks in order to do that. This could look a number of ways. What you guys are looking at right now is one of our projects. It's called Neighborhood Stat. This is a project that has, it's located inside NYCHA developments, 15 housing developments across New York City. And essentially what this project does is it allots $50,000 for a group of residents in that public housing development to build a stakeholder group. And they address, do assessments, surveys, studies of that location, and they come up with a solution for that particular housing development to address a need. And that need could be anything from public safety to crime, to entrepreneurial programs for young people or any other kinds of programs, but really to address public safety. This also could address lighting. This could be placemaking. This could be a tool that we often use called CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design, really creating alternatives for community to increase public safety without having to necessarily rely on incarceration. Another strategy that we use that I want to share with folks, and I apologize if I'm breezing through this quickly, I want to be respectful of time, is our Save Our Streets program. So CDCP is very much interested in preventing violence, and our projects work to create safer communities by working directly with individuals most likely to be involved in or impacted by violence. For example, neighborhoods that have, a large uptick in gun violence, for example. I know this is something that many of us have been concerned about over the past few months. Staff focus on preventing shootings from occurring by mediating conflicts and mentoring residents who are at risk of perpetuating the violence. And so these are staff members at our programs, at our projects, that may have themselves been connected to or involved in gangs or in the street, and they've now pivoted. And we work with those residents, we work with those folks who have those inroads and develop and establish relationships with community who also might be at risk of perpetuating that. That includes everything from canvassing the neighborhoods, walking grids that are identified as hotspots, quote unquote, or even if a young person that's connected to one of our programs is shot, goes to a hospital, we have hospital respondents that check on that young person, go to the hospital and talk through with them alternatives to retaliation, considering how serious that can be. Another example of a priority area for us is addressing the root of these issues, of these challenges. And for us, we do find that the root of many of these challenges is poverty. We do understand that a long-term community safety plan can't be achieved without addressing poverty, crime, and structural racism, all of those things that contribute to the trauma that influence decisions that young people and people in crisis in general struggle with and navigate with. And so an integral part of our safety approach is driving mobility out of poverty efforts through a combination of entrepreneurship training, incubating small business ideas, creating safe spaces and safe spaces in business corridors that can attract more business customers and investment. This does often look like partnerships that we've established with New York City Small Business Services, for example. They have a Neighborhood 360 program that we support with them. And through this program, we work with the local NYPD precincts at hotspots in commercial corridors. What kind of activity is happening there? Is it robberies? Is it assaults? Is it gun violence? And then we address those quality of life concerns. An interesting note, a recent study from the Community Citizens Report makes this connection that supported our hypothesis that a lot of the upticks in gun violence over the past few months, there were 311 calls that were connected to quality of life concerns that happened before the violence occurred in many of those incidents. And so addressing quality of life concerns in commercial corridors that result in violence is an intentional strategy that we partner with New York City Small Business Services on. This also could involve placemaking or the development or strengthening of merchant associations and bids, and making sure that they have, additional resources and supports that they need in order to address the criminogenic factor along those commercial corridors, to address the public safety, so those businesses can thrive and new businesses can actually come to those commercial corridors. A few more notes on key areas. I'm going to do about 4 more and then take a little bit of a break in case there are questions or areas you guys want me to dig into more. One of them is access to justice. So poverty and eviction, they too often go hand in hand, and in neighborhoods where residents are facing housing insecurity or lack of employment, sometimes even gentrification, our department links those vulnerable tenants with the services and supports they need to stay in their homes. And so this often looks like, in our locations across the city, housing resource centers, where we support residents who are in crisis, often in public housing, that are looking for support with rental arrears or repairs in the home, or they have justice involvement and are facing eviction from public housing. And we connect them to legal resources to support them through those challenges. The last 3, one is reducing the justice system footprint. So we are dedicated to transforming harmful systems and changing the dynamic between residents and the criminal justice system. For us, that might look like creating off-ramps that lead away from incarceration towards more proportionate, meaningful, restorative outcomes. This does look like alternative to incarceration in diversion programs. This has looked like, community courts in many locations across New York City, where residents are, the root cause of the challenges that brought them in front of a judge are addressed, so that they're not just incarcerated, and when they come out, they have the same issues that brought them in front of a judge into the first place. We really try to address those core issues and create robust, diversion and alternative to incarceration programs, similarly to one Some of you may have heard of Project Reset. That's an example of one of those kinds of projects. And then lastly, the last two is really addressing individual and community trauma. And so we understand that we work in spaces that have experienced tremendous individual, community, and historical trauma. It's very real for our residents. Public safety solutions that are not trauma informed can perpetuate that trauma. And so we do make sure that our placemaking projects, our youth programs, and the collaborative spaces we create with stakeholders to present solutions implore trauma-informed practices in order to create the most healthy way forward and to create stronger ties between stakeholders and community where there are challenges. An example of a program like this is something that we have called, it started actually as the youth court, where young people were, tried by peers at their same age, and they were using transformative justice practices to address whatever harm was done to community, bringing two opposing factions together, and then coming up with a solution that would be amenable to both parties and the court. And it was actually young people that were presiding over these cases. And we still do have programs like this across the city. The last one that I'll speak to is just valuing and listening to youth. Again, young people are at the center of a lot of the challenges that we have in community. They have the highest contact with the justice system. We do know that some of our communities struggle with challenges around gangs and crews and sets and all that stuff. And so we do, in all of our programs, prioritize at-risk youth, making sure they're recruited into these programs at the center of the solution. And we do believe that young people that are coming up with the solutions to these challenges in community ultimately are the ones that end up wanting to protect it, right? If there are challenges, let's say there are two crews that have beef with each other, and that beef plays out in a commercial corridor or on a certain block. Working with those two groups, those young people, in order to address what the challenges are and have them do civic engagement projects in those spaces increases the potential that they want to protect those spaces, be more civically engaged, and support the work, the public safety work that has to happen in those spaces that's addressing some of the challenges that they have. So I said a lot. There are a lot of pretty pictures here, and I can go into depth into what some of these programs actually look like on the ground. I do want to take a step back just to, see if there are any questions, if there are any programs that you would like us to dig into more here. And just wanted to say thank you guys for your interest in the programs. I'm aware of some of the challenges that, you guys have been facing in some of your neighborhoods that are in Community Board 14's area, and I'm very interested in being helpful however I can be.
Are there any questions from the members of the board or guests that are in the meeting?
If anyone would like to speak, raise your hand or just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask questions.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I see no hands raised at this point, but feel free to raise your hands or ask questions.
Joe Dweck has his hand up.
Yeah, Joe Dweck.
Mr. Johnston, I'd like to know the reason that we had a 400% increase this past year in shootings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a really good question. There are, a number of researchers and studies that are actually unpacking the phenomena. I think it's interesting to note that this isn't something that's specific to New York City. This uptick is happening across the country, and we're working with our practitioners, our research teams, and our technical assistance teams in real time to address that issue. I do think that we are also working very closely with NYPD and a lot of these districts to implement solutions to that challenge. And one of the things that I can do for this group in particular is I can send you that research. I can send the reports that, specifically are addressing the uptick in gun violence. One of the reports did show, and this is what I, mentioned earlier, is the community citizens report that specifically spoke about gun violence, the uptick in gun violence in the past few months, made a very distinct connection between the uptick in gun violence and quality of life, and how quality of life challenges and crises often create opportunity for what's already a challenge in a neighborhood to fester, right? For it to boil to the surface. So if there are quality of life challenges that are pervasive in certain pockets of the neighborhood, and then there is a widespread crises that happens, it's very likely that those challenges are going to rise to the surface. And so I would be more than happy to share, the research around that and share these studies with this group. I have about 3 or 4 that specifically talk about gun violence. And there's another one that the Center for Court Innovation actually did that was specific to the young people who identified themselves as those who felt like they needed a gun, or they felt like they lacked safety and options and alternatives, particularly in micro neighborhoods in our communities that are afflicted with poverty and quality of life challenges, and how that results in gun violence. And so again, I would be more than happy to share that study to dig into those details as well. Thank you for that question. I appreciate that.
With all due respect, Mr. Johnston, it was not an uptick, it's a quadrupling, and it happened as of January 1st of last year. And what was coincidental to that was no bail law. And so now the bad guys are let out instantaneously, and they're shooting more, and they're getting killed, and people are getting killed more. And who do you think is suffering?
Yeah, I appreciate that response too. We also have a study, and maybe I should have led with this also. A large part of the Center for Court Innovation's work is around research and studies. And so I'm more than happy to share our research team's study that specifically unpacks the intersection between gun violence over the past year and bail reform. I'll also say that there was a large convening that was supported by the Robin Hood Foundation that specifically spoke to bail reform, specific to the prosecutorial system and how that plays a role in gun violence, and what you are proposing, making the connection between bail reform and gun violence that happened over the past year. And so again, I really do appreciate that question too. It is, at the top of our conversation often, and I will definitely follow up on that and send that report to you all as well. And I'll highlight the specific area that addresses that concern. I think you'll find it interesting.
Thank you, and we'll make sure that it gets disseminated. It looks as though, I'm not sure if Svi's.
I'm on the phone now because I had bandwidth issue.
Okay, Svi, the police officer, Officer Joseph has his hand up. If you'd like to let him speak, but before you do, I just want to give him a shout out because he's been he's taken a lot of initiative to engage people with whom he interacts, and is just a really hard worker. But I don't know what his question is, so sorry to jump in, and I just had to sing praises.
No. I appreciate you jumping in because this way you can see what I cannot see at the current moment. So thank you. So yes, Officer Joseph has the opportunity now to speak.
Thank you so much, Sean and Darren. Thank you.
Hello?
Hear me?
Hello?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Now my phone line is dead too?
The two programs.
It's not working very well.
Program Incredible.
Sean, are you there?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Svi, we can hear you, but you have to mute yourself because there's feedback as Officer Joseph tries to speak.
Go ahead.
I believe calling in on the phone, so that's.
Try
Okay,
again,
thank
Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, and thank you, Darren, for your presentations. Great information that you shared. Two things I want to elaborate on: the Save Our Schools program and the Credible. Is there a particular area that you guys focus in, or is it throughout the city? that you can have the credible messengers come out and to do the work that they do. So the both of them, the SOS program and the credible messengers. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. Right now, we have cure violence or credible messenger programs in a number of locations. One is in Crown Heights, one is in Bed-Stuy, one is in the Bronx, and then we also have the Brownsville Community Justice Center is supporting 4 local organizations in Brownsville that are also wanting to launch cure violence programs as well to support the challenges around violence in Brownsville. And so those are the locations that we currently have credible messengers in. I will say this though, we have a number of staff that currently work in the Crown Heights location that work with a team of credible messengers and SOS workers who are actually from Community Board 14. Who were born and raised in Flatbush in particular, and are very interested in supporting some of the challenges noted earlier, particularly to the question around the aftermath of bail reform, as mentioned earlier, or the increase in shootings. That is the bread and butter of what those staff do. And I spoke to them before this conversation, and they are interested in doing work with Community Board 14 and really starting to keep this conversation going so we could address some of these challenges and issues. And if it is helpful, I can directly connect the director of Neighbors in Action who supports the credible messengers in Crown Heights, who also I can loop into this conversation. And I'm guessing that you're asking this question because maybe you're thinking about the possibility of that happening in Community Board 14, is that correct?
Because we work different in the organizations, but they don't really fall under pure violence because one of the things is around funding. And so we don't get involved in conversation when it comes to funding. If there is programs that are already established, we definitely communicate with them and maybe set up a meeting where we can do shooting responses, or just like you said, someone gets shot, that they can go into the hospital to kind of like steer them away from retaliating. So this is something that we're definitely interested in. With different people that we have been talking to, but they just, they're not funded and they're not fully organized. So if this is already in place, we definitely want to get it over on our side so it can pretty much help us out.
Gotcha. Okay, so there are 2 organizations that are in East Flatbush that I'm aware of. One of them is an organization that does have an express interest in doing this kind of work in East Flatbush. The name of that organization is Elite Learners. I'm in direct conversation and communication with Elite Learners. We work collaboratively at times. And I would be more than happy to circle back around to them and let them know that there is some interest here, that there are some challenges, and you guys would be interested in exploring what that work is. Now, I do believe Elite Learners is primarily located in Brownsville, but recently opened a location in East Flatbush, but to do work there. So I do want to confirm that. I'll circle back around to that organization. The other thing that I do want to address is, the comment around funding. Before, we had a cure violence or credible messenger program established in Brownsville. We didn't have funding specific from, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice supports a lot of that work. We found alternative ways to support and fund that work. And so if you don't have an organization that has a credible messenger program or a cure violence SOS program, but is interested in doing public safety or violence prevention work, I would be more than happy to touch base with that youth organization and explore funding opportunities for them as well. That is something that we have supported local nonprofits around and with. We provide technical assistance to jurisdictions around the country, often around expanding these initiatives so we can help public safety challenges in communities. So there's some options there. I'll touch base with the organization that I'm familiar with in the East Flatbush area that might be able to stretch to you guys' location. And if you guys also identify youth programs that you think would want a credible messenger program, then feel free to connect me with that program and I can work with them directly on what the options are.
Yes, please, you could just share your contact and we'll be
I would be more than happy to. Would you like me to put my my email address in the chat here?
fine.
Please do that if you don't mind, and then I'll also just make sure that that they have it at the 7:0. And if I can jump in again, we can also share this sort of invitation, if you will, to help organizations gear up into these programs with our list of organizations that have participated with us at the youth conference and have asked us to post flyers and engaged with us previously. Because as Officer Joseph indicated, I think that we would like to see more in this district, and East Flatbush is east of Flatbush. So I'm going to bring them west on over to us. And if I could ask another question, because I feel like, Darren, you've implied answers to this question on several levels, but you haven't said a word that's come up in this committee. So I just want to say a word out loud and ask you to respond to the concept of recidivism and the extent to which you might be engaging with somebody who's had more than one experience or more than a few experiences with the criminal justice system versus somebody who's like a one-off and into that diversion program. If you could speak to that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we have a number of diversion programs at our locations across New York City, and depending on sometimes the severity of the case or a lot of this is contingent upon the actual case. I will say the success rate around recidivism for programs of ours in places like Brownsville, for young people that have been provided wraparound social services or connected with a case manager or a social worker that helps them address, again, the root issue. Is it something happening at home? Are they couch surfing? Is it poverty issues? Is it workforce development? Is it, the peer group? The social worker and the case manager provides wraparound social services to that young person and the family, what's happening in the home. And those wraparound services have provided us a success rate of anywhere between 86 and 92% in young people not recidivating again. So if there is a pattern of recidivism, or if it is a one-off situation, the connection to the case manager or the social worker or a youth program that provides those wraparound social services increases the chance that a young person will not recidivate. And we've seen that success rate in places like Brownsville. We've also seen it in Red Hook at the Red Hook Community Justice Centers, a community court that's out in Red Hook. Similarly, we have one in Midtown, the Bronx, Queens, and Harlem, Staten Island as well. Does that answer the question?
I think it underscores things that you've said. I don't know if there's any follow-up to it by from people who've expressed this concern in the past, because I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. It looks like that was a very satisfactory answer.
I aim to please. And just so everyone's aware, I did put my contact information in the chat. If there are more questions and concerns about what I've shared, or if there are critiques, I'm more than happy to continue the conversation and bring, more experts around research, more experts around bail reform, more experts around recidivism. I have a large team, and we're more than happy to unpack this for everyone. So please do not hesitate to shoot me an email, and I will respond promptly.
Thank you so much. I'm back on the phone now because I was knocked off the computer once again. Are there any further questions for Mr. Johnson? I'm not having too much luck with this.
No, thanks for hanging in there, Svi. Sorry for the tech issues, and I don't see any other hands up. I just want to repeat, because there were people who were on early and then others who joined a little bit later. but I just want to repeat that we've gotten some very encouraging response to our outreach into the youth of the community, for people who are interested in becoming part of the Youth Leadership Council. And so we look forward to continuing to put that together, and Mr. Johnson, continuing to engage you, because we think that that's going to be, just the responses are so encouraging. The young people seem really bright and interested and wanting to do interesting things. So we'll keep you in that loop for sure. And our youth committee meeting is on the 24th of this month at 6:30. And then we are continuing to plan for our youth conference, which will be held in May. And so we're gonna, try to lasso you for that as well. And the precinct is always super supportive of that event too. So thanks for letting me chatter so much. Anybody else?
Thank you, Sean. Anyone else that wishes to say anything at this time? No? Okay. Then at this time, Mr. Johnson, I would like you to be aware that I'm going to ask Sean to be able to have some way of contacting you so that I can follow up with a good report that we have coming up at the next meeting. And if there are no other events that we take care of at this time, Sean, then we will bang the gavel to end the meeting at this time.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
With us.
And thank you for your help, and Anya as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.